Hi, I'm Farm Mom with Around the Farm Crafts, and this is our friend Cookie. He is an English Angora rabbit, which means he is a breed of wool rabbit, and we have about 8 English Angora bunnies here at our farm that we use for fiber production. We spin their wool into high quality yarn to make hats, shawls, things for ourselves, as well as selling fiber in our Etsy store. And I am going to do a multi-part series on basically rabbit to hat or rabbit to shawl. You might have heard of sheep to shawl types of activities before, but in this case we're going to be using our really nice fiber from our Angora bunnies. And so the first thing I wanted to show you today is how we groom our bunnies and how we harvest the fiber from the bunnies. So Cookie has been groomed about 2 weeks ago, and he's due for a bit more of a comb up. And we're going to try to not take a lot of wool off of him today. We would like for him to develop a really full, thick coat so that he looks good for the shows, the 4-H show, particularly this summer. But we don't have a lot of control over that because the English Angora do molt their coat about 4 times a year. So sometimes it just comes out to be luck as to whether the bunny has a full coat on at the time of the show that you want to go to. So right now we're just going to take our brush and do a little bit of gentle grooming. He does have a few little knots here that are going to need to be contended with. Matting or felting is a big problem in the Angoras, and the English especially, because the English Angora have less guard hairs. The guard hairs in some of the larger breeds of rabbits, Angora rabbits, help prevent matting to some extent, because almost all of Cookie's wool is the really fine fiber. It is going to mat more easily, and he especially has problems right here in the front of the shoulder area and at the back of the ears. Those always tend to be a problem for him. So we will get to those mats here momentarily, but what we're going to start with is we're going to kind of pull up on his large amount of wool here and just kind of start down low, and we're going to just use the slicker brush. It tends to take out less wool than using the comb. When we're harvesting, particularly when they're during a molt, then using the comb takes off a lot of wool very quickly. But since our aim right now, particularly since we're still in cold weather, is we don't want to take off a lot of wool right now, just the amount that comes out in normal grooming, because if we don't groom him, he'll become quite matted. So we just start down here low, and we're just fluffing that out and kind of go up layer by layer gently. We're not looking to pull out a lot of fur, but some will naturally come because there's always a few fibers that are loose. This will be very different when he actually does start going through his molt. He will have a lot more coming out, but you can see a little bit naturally will come out with a normal grooming. And then we have a bucket for each bunny that way we can keep it straight to know whose wool belongs to who. We just keep working along, and this helps to get any debris out of the coat. It helps to keep the, as spinners, we talk about how much vegetable matter, or VM, tends to be in the fiber. We want to be removing that with our grooming. So you end up with much less vegetable matter in a well-maintained Angora coat than you do when you're talking about your sheep or your alpaca, because they tend to get a lot more vegetable matter in their coats from eating the hay. The Angora bunnies are, being kept in a cage with a slotted floor, so they don't tend to be sitting in their bedding. They're above their bedding, so you don't have quite as much of an issue with the vegetable matter getting into the coat and the fiber. So we're just kind of lifting and separating and fluffing to keep it from matting together. And this gets out any little knots that are starting to try to crop up. This needs to be done really weekly. It's been about 2 weeks since Cookie had a really good grooming, and so he is definitely due. As you can see, this doesn't bother him at all. Having a lot of big mats would bother him, so he really doesn't mind. And English Angora are a very mild-mannered rabbit. We also raise New Zealand rabbits, and if I'm going to get scratched, it's almost always the New Zealands that scratch me. So on his little face up here, we got to make sure we know where his little eye is, because we don't want to scratch his eye as we comb his forelock. Okay, so then we're try to be real gentle on his ears, because the skin on their ears is quite thin, but the hairs there need brushed too. Okay, now we have quite a bad little mat here, so we're going to just try to work around it. Almost just as if you had a child that had a little snarl in their hair. You just try to be as gentle as you can. It needs to come out. You don't want to cut it and have a big gouge. But yeah, you can see that the knotted part is coming right out, and then the fur underneath is able to be left behind. Now these parts that have the bad knots, I set aside, and while you can't actually make good dryer balls out of Angora because it is far too light, for a good dryer ball you need a little bit more weight to your fiber. I do go ahead and make some little felted balls out of the Angora for cat toys, juggling balls, that kind of thing. So here's another little knot. We're just going to try to carefully work that out. Leave as much behind as we can. Sometimes on these little ones we can resort to the comb and just kind of getting the comb behind it. And that came out. okay there, buddy? Okay, I think we just about have this last little great bit of this. There we go. That was a pretty big one, so we don't like to let them get that big if we can help it. So then we're going to go back to the slicker brush and finish working on getting the knots out like that. So I would then proceed to turn him around and comb the other side of his body out in the same way. He's also usually quite amenable to being flipped over and having his, you're all right, having his belly brushed. And so that is how we groom the English Angoras. Now, the fiber that I collect from the brushings is not going to be what we sell as prime Angora. Prime Angora is collected during the time when they are in full molt. And the way that is generally done, he may have a few hairs that are starting to molt now. And so the way the prime Angora, what we call plucked, which is not actually pulled out in a way that harms the rabbit in any way, but you just kind of pet the rabbit and you stroke and you get a few hairs that come out. And when they're in full molt, each time you kind of stroke the hair like this, you're going to get quite a bit. As you can see, I have a few hairs that came out, quite a nice staple length at this point. And while we would like to keep his coat on him for a few more months, more than likely, he is probably going to go into a molt here in another month or so. So we will just keep grooming. We save the combings. So even just from the little bit of combing that I was able to do, we've collected some, and this is all quite good fiber that I will make into poonies with the hand card and then be able to spin, and that will be the topic of the next video. So if you are a fiber artist and interested, please join us for the next installment on this series of Rabbit to a Finished Garment. Hi, I'm back, and I thought that you might want to see Cookie with his final grooming job. He's all fluffed up and both sides. What I did discover while I was finishing up brushing him is that he is starting to molt just a little bit here towards his rump. And just to show you what that looks like is that as I pet, I get quite a bit more fiber coming out when I stroke. So that means that he will probably blow his coat here over the next couple weeks. And so this is how we harvest the boxed prime Angora on our Etsy site, is that I just kind of pet him like this, and we gather it up and put it in a box so it's nice and straight for blending with other fibers, or for those that like to make their own poonies or rollags, or even who just like to spin from the fluff, or from the cloud, as we sometimes call it. The other thing that I will mention is that when you are grooming the Angora bunnies, you want to keep a tape roller handy, because it is a very fuzzy job, and you end up with feeling, at least, as if you have as much fluff on you as the bunny. So if you raise Angoras or are thinking about raising Angoras, you will want to have some tape rollers on hand when you're grooming them. So from here, we will go on to processing the fiber with cards and then spinning it. And I hope you'll be able to join us.